Okay, I'm going to get us started. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shireen White, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Policy at Children's Rights, a national nonprofit that uses strategic advocacy and impact litigation to fight for systemic change in our U.S. child welfare, juvenile justice, immigration, education, and healthcare systems. Over the last year, the momentum to examine and reimagine what we call child protection in this country has been growing, and it is not letting up. In August, I had the opportunity to travel to Geneva, Switzerland with my colleague Stephanie Person and our partners, Joyce McMillan, Angela Burton, and Hina Navid, and to present before the United Nations about discrimination in the U.S. child welfare system. We focused heavily on the critical need to repeal laws that are racist and that have racist outcomes, and the UN heard us. In their concluding observations, they explicitly tasked the United States with amending or repealing laws, including the Adoption and Safe Families Act, that have a disparate impact on families of racial and ethnic minorities. As we approach 25 years since the enactment of ASFA, it is imperative that people listen up about the harm caused by this legislation and take action. We opened this series with a powerful webinar by our partners, Family Integrity and Justice Works at Public Knowledge. And if you didn't catch it live, please take a look at the recording. Also, our partners at the Center for the Study of Social Policy published a statement on repealing ASFA today. You can find that worthy read on their website. And today, I could not be more proud to have this conversation with the panelists that are before you. I'll turn it over to each of them for brief introductions. Let's start with you, Antonica.
Thank you so much for that. So my name is Antonica Frazier. I also go by Tawny. My pronouns are she, hers, and hers, and I'm currently located in Albany, Louisiana. It's really on the outskirts, if you're familiar with having here in Louisiana. I currently serve as the Louisiana Elite Advocacy Force Vice President for the board, and I serve as the chairman of the policy subcommittee. For my day-to-day work, my full-time job, I am the Lived Experience Engagement Specialist for the Center for States, and I am a full-time mom. I have a beautiful 17-month-old daughter named Jasmine. You might occasionally hear provide her input. But I'm so glad to be here. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you so much, Antonica. Aisha?
Hi, my name is Aisha. Hello, everyone. I'm the first parent ally for the state of New Jersey since 2018, and I am also a former foster youth. So, yeah. Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Aisha. Carlo?
Hello, my name is Carlo Moser. I am here in North Carolina. I am a youth advocate in regards of the local and the national, assisting with Children's Home Society, Say So Incorporated, which is the second oldest youth advocacy group in the United States, and also with the Annie Casey Foundation. If you haven't caught with just wherever I can help out, that's where I'm going to be.
Thanks, Carlo. Well, we're glad you decided to be here with us today. Jazz?
Good afternoon and morning, everyone. My name is Jazz Snell. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a 27-year-old daughter, sister, aunt, cousin, niece, granddaughter, neighbor, coach, friend, colleague, and spiritual being who is of African descent. I hold system experiences that are generational for my family, including a failed adoption. And I now work as a child welfare and homeless services consultant to promote community restoration and services that heal and not harm families. I'm based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, but I work where I am sent, and happy to be here with you all.
Thank you, Jazz. Aaliyah?
Yes, hey, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. My name is Aaliyah Zian. Currently, I serve as a state youth ambassador at DCFS in Louisiana. I live in Baton Rouge here. I'm also a former foster youth with 5 years of lived experience in the system. And I also serve as a national advocate on several different projects, and just wherever I'm needed in child welfare, honestly, that's what I do. So thank y'all for having me.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Well, we're going to jump right into it because our time is going to go really quickly. If people want to populate with questions, hopefully we can get to them. We'll try to leave at least 10 minutes or so at the end for questions. But please feel free to utilize the Q&A function for that. So in the 25 years since Congress enacted ASFA, the U.S. has subjected more than 2 million children to the termination of their parents' rights. We know that ASFA's TPR requirements have disproportionately harmed Black children and families who are 2.4 times more likely to experience TPR than white families. There is so much more than the data, though. Can you all talk about some of the harms of ASFA that families experience and that we need to keep central to this conversation in order to move forward with change? Why don't we start with Carlo?
Yes, I really feel like when you look at, for me, I'm going to focus more on the resources. It's very difficult when we are looking for the betterment of the child, when there are more resources given, when, as you say, when you are looking as far as foster care, looking in regards to adoption. However, in my case, when it came to my own father, who was actually asked, if you would be able to take care of your child. And he said that he was not able to because he did not have the resources. And it was a little heartbreaking to hear that, instead of seeing, okay, what type of resources can we assist to make sure that he can stay in the family? Instead, it was more like through the court records of, okay, we asked him, he couldn't do it, and now we're going to move forward. And for me, that is actually, it was very difficult to hear, especially when in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that he doesn't love me anymore, which that wasn't the case. He just did not have the actual necessities or resources to house me at that time. So when you look back at it, and when you actually see the way that ASFA's TPR requirements, it makes you wonder how much they are focused on the betterment of the child, or if it's more of a transactional way of, okay, this doesn't work, we'll go here, and then now problem solved. And we've seen how that has transpired, unfortunately.
Just touching on that transactional piece, Carlo, you also mentioned that as far as you were concerned, you thought that your father just didn't love you, or your parents didn't love you, didn't want to care for you. Can you go a little bit deeper on that point? How did anybody share with you what was happening, what was going to transpire, ask you your thoughts on that? Can you go a little bit deeper on that piece?
Sure. No one really told me. Actually, the way it happened was there was a lot of nuances that I did not understand of what was going on. And the way that they pretty much told me was that your parents are not making strides to make sure that they keep you. And what made it worse is that the social worker actually came to my high school, and they asked me to come up to the office, and he just asked me, do you want to relinquish rights from your parents? In high school, it's kind of difficult to just automatically make a decision. However, because of how much they were ramped up, of how much my parents did not love me, in a sense, an off way of putting it, I just said, yeah. Because the next thing you know, they started talking about college, and I could get to go to school for free and all of these nice things. However, I wish somebody would have said that legally that they are no longer your parents. All of the records that you have until this time will be sealed / erased from public view. I wish someone would have told me all of the stipulations of, now I'm trying to find my identity as a person. If someone would have walked me through these things, I even feel like my decision may have changed as well.
Thanks for sharing that, Carlo. Antonica, can we turn to you to just talk a little bit about what you perceive as the harms that families experience?
Yes. So for me, it's more of really want to focus on the emotional harm that is left, also for not just for the youth, but also for the parents. So for me, when I think about is that feeling of no longer having parents, it's very, very hard for youth to deal with, especially in care. I know for myself, That feeling of loss is real. Not knowing that, not even just knowing, not even having parents anymore, coming to that reality that I might not ever see them again. I can't find them. And I know like some youth in care really struggle with this. That feeling of, was I wanted? Was I loved? Was I worthy enough? That loss of having permanency, being able to actually find other stable relationships outside of dealing with that loss is very hard. I know for myself and plenty of others, after coming into care and coming out of care, that feeling of not being loved or unwanted, it's a real struggle, especially when you're trying to get out of that and really make friendships with people, but when you don't really know if they're going to be there long term, whether they're going to really care about you. It really does change the dynamic of how you view the world and relationships. There's also that uncertainty of knowing a secure love that can cause great harm to children. Children in care, due to their environments and their family circumstances, they're going into a system to where they're really unsure whether that home that they're going to, that those parents who are now supposed to provide and take care of them really do have their best interests at heart. And also too, I think it's not also thought of like, how is the youth are supposed to operate in these new types of environments? They're being removed from their known home life, as toxic as it may be, comfortable as it may be. That is what they knew. That is what they grew up so involved in. So to be removed from that, to be put into a system with a bunch of strangers, it's a completely different and overwhelming feeling. It really truly is. So it's really focusing on that emotional harm, that effect that is really left on youth, having to pick up the pieces of their own lives and really not being informed of what's going on, or really not even having the support that they really need to really understand that this is a situation that you're involved in, but there are people who genuinely care, and that's not always being told.
Thank you, Antonica. I think that emotional piece is something that we don't think about or talk about enough. So I appreciate you raising it. And Carlo, you started to get into that a little bit. You mentioned the harm of sort of not knowing who you are, your identity. Do you want to add anything to that aspect?
Yes, and that's the biggest thing. I feel like it's very difficult when you think about transactionally having the child termination of parental rights, and then now they're just going to a completely different set of people. But what you have to realize is that their identity has now shifted. For me, when it comes to my identity, I was about to go down the wrong path, and people don't understand how easy that can go. And when I say wrong path, I don't mean just I'm about to be a small little delinquent. I mean gang life, drug life, to the point to where my teachers were like actually concerned because of the things that I started wearing. Next thing you know, they started seeing the same type of wear with me and other people. And when it came to drugs, more like, okay, because now this is the good thing, and this is a family in a sense, even though the gang life and drug life isn't a family, it's more like who gets what. But when you are searching for identity, when you are searching for someone to love you, and even trying to figure out how I'm going to make it in life, when you take the identity away from a child, those things can easily happen, especially if they're in that environment. And for me, I'm very thankful that there were those who got me out of it. But I can definitely tell you that when it came to the system itself was not the one to assist me to get out of it. It was those who literally decided that they saw different in me and actually took me away from that environment itself. And I'm saying that in regards of the identity is what I held on to. But once that identity was ripped from me, that's when I started to go down those wrong paths. So it can really mess with the psyche of the child that's actually going through it.
Yeah, thank you, Carlo. Antonica, did you want to add anything else to this?
I do. Carl, I think that was a beautiful point that you brought up about walking the wrong path. I know for myself, I have made a lot of poor choices that I am not proud of, but I do think based upon the choices that I've made, I do realize a lot of that really had to do with the lack of support system that I did not have. Going into care and coming out of care and going back and coming, it was just the consistency of really not knowing who I am, what am I supposed to be. And so I do believe that when we remove children from their known environment, there are those times so where they do turn on to that wrong path, but there's not enough guidance and support, and that lack of permanency, that lack of really having genuine people in your corner to really direct you on the path it truly can hinders our well-being. I know for myself, coming into care, I did not have a support system. I was completely lost. I was 13 years old. I had nobody. I was coming from a family who truly just truly hated me at the time, did not want me, did not love me. And so going into care, I really thought that everyone would probably felt the same way. And when people tried to reach out to me, I was very, I was in that rebellious state, or that mind state of like, you don't love me, you're just lying to me, you're not. And that comes from that feeling of not having parents, that loss of permanency, having that uncertainty. And so based upon that, I really made several poor choices that could have landed me in jail possibly, but it did not. But through all of that, I think it's also good to take into account that youths who do rebel, or they might be making those poor choices, there's a reason for it all. We hear those terms of juvenile delinquent sometimes associated with form of falsity, which really gives that negative connotation. It really adds to that feeling for youth, adults, of still feeling that unwantedness, still feeling that uncertainty, still really degrading them, which is not the plan here. Emotional harm is real, it does exist, and it can be long lasting depending on the circumstances. But I think it's very important when we're talking about this to really think about how can we better support youth during this process. What are those tools and resources that we can give to them?
Thanks, Antonica. So, Aaliyah, I'll turn to you in just 1 second. I just want to sort of recap here in terms of the harms that were spoken about. We talked about the harm of failing to provide resources to families that are in need so families could stay together. The harm of having basically your identity completely severed and not knowing who you are, right? Setting yourself up, or them setting the system, setting you up for some unknown path, right? And the emotional harm and impact that terminating parental rights have had on all of you. Aaliyah, you want to add to this?
Yeah, really quickly, I'm just going to say a couple of points. So I think that the saddest part about the insufficient resources is that it exists across nationwide, because these agencies rely on public services, nonprofits, and state funding. There's never going to be adequate resources to really provide for the families that are in the child welfare system. And a lot of the resources that exist overlap. They have long waiting terms. They're discouraging. Some of the practitioners are not culturally competent to really work with the families from diverse backgrounds that are involved with the child welfare system, as well as the fact that, they just are not timely. Sometimes with the timeline that exists, it's just not realistic, and it just doesn't provide the adequate help that they'll actually need. And I just want to touch on what Antonica said. I think that the term terminating parental rights, it really makes a child lose a sense of their identity. And with myself, as well as youth I've worked with, I found myself having to constantly remind them, no, your parents' rights were terminated, or you can't go home anymore, or you can't visit. You have to constantly remind them, because in terms of what Carlo is saying about the mental state and the psyche, it's embedded and ingrained in them before they enter foster care, however bad the environment was. I'm going to go home every day. I'm going to wake up with my parents. I'm going to wake up with my family. On holidays, we do this. On Sundays, we go to church, or on Saturdays, we do this, or whatever. So no matter the negative environment, that is what they're accustomed to, used to, and developmentally, that's what they've grew up around their entire life until ending up in foster care. And so it's literally the look on their face when you have to remind them, and the pain that kind of warps over them for youth that have experienced TPR or is in that pre-adoption phase, when you have to tell them you can't visit with them anymore because, you know, your parents can't see you or you're not supposed to call them, that also affects the rebellious nature because they're constantly trying to grapple with the fact that they might not see their parents again, their siblings again until they turn 18. And then that also can lead to poor outcomes and choices because they're trying to rush back to their roots in their biological family, feeling the responsibility on themselves of reconnecting because there was no real connection following TPR, whether it was with their parents or their extended family. So you really lose like your sense of overall identity. And it makes you strive for love and acceptance later on in life because you just feel like you're constantly trying to replace something you're missing. Mm-hmm. And that can lead you on a really negative path in life, trying to constantly look for other people to uplift you or accept you.
Mm. Thank you for that, Aaliyah. And I'm just thinking about you having to constantly remind the young people that their parents' rights have been terminated, that that legal relationship is not there, that they're not going home. And, you know, I can't help but think the reason that doesn't sink in is because it's unnatural and it's inhumane to think that, you know, their parents who birthed them are no longer their parents by law, that somebody else has declared that for them, you know?
And you don't know how many times I've heard, well, I just thought my mom was going to get better. Or I just thought like that really will stick with you. Like the look in a child's eyes when they're like, but I thought that mom or dad was working on this and I thought they only had 2 or 3 more things left to do. It's not good. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that brings me to our next point. But before we get there, I just want to, for those who joined late, and just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the Adoption and Safe Families Act, sometimes you'll hear me say ASFA. That's what we're referring to, this piece of legislation that this entire discussion is centered on, that allows the termination of parental rights, that allows children's rights to be terminated to their parents and vice versa. And TPR, if I say TPR, it's short for termination of parental rights or terminating parental rights. Aaliyah brought this up, and I want to dive a little more deeply into it. I think one of the most well-known provisions in the Adoption and Safe Families Act is the TPR timelines, the termination of parental rights timelines. It's the piece of the law that says if a child has been in foster care for 15 of the last 22 months, a state is permitted to move forward with terminating parental rights. And I'd like to get some of your thoughts on this timeline, the fact that it exists and that it's something that's presented to most parents who have their children removed. And I'll start with you, Jazz.
All right. Thanks, Shireen. Well, first, we're talking about timeline. So what exactly is time? Other than our sun rising each day and setting, what is time? And because of the how ambiguous it is, we have to realize that what works for one family, let's say within a 6-month time frame, it may not work for another family within 2 years. So the standard of having a deadline, because that's what the timeline is, it's a deadline. It's completely rooted in what I consider to be white dominant culture. And we should focus more on present conditions rather than timelines. And in my personal case, TPR did happen. And that timeline did not take things into consideration like my father being incarcerated or my mother's longstanding gambling addiction that kept us in poverty. So the temporary fixes that came, they did not address those challenges and were forced upon myself and my family because of this timeline. Those were placements in group homes, foster homes, and ultimately adoption. And all of those temporary fixes failed. And now that I'm an older and conscious adult, I'm left with an even more challenging responsibility, and that's reaching out to my parents who are no longer legally bound to me. I would say the most reasonable, realistic, and simple fix to this timeline issue is to shift first our mindsets and then regulations around how a family, a child, or a youth may receive the help that they need. And we have to be okay expending resources that may not come full circle, and doing so regardless of timelines. It's already happening. It's going to continue happening. And that level of risk, to me, it seems unavoidable. So we have to adjust and pivot, and requiring legal separation based on a timeline is not only inhumane, it's, to me, unethical. So this doesn't mean that all goals should be eliminated. Goals should definitely remain within a line of sight and be worked towards, but harsh deadlines are not the answer.
Thank you for that, Jazz. Antonica, you want to weigh in here on just how you feel about, how you've experienced, how you understand the timelines?
I do. So it's so funny. It's interesting that you mentioned about the timelines, because for myself, for my situation, when I was still in care around the age of 14 to 15, I was actually supposed to be getting adopted, which led to my parents signing over their rights. But see, I did not know that in between 15 to 22 months, if the child has remained in care, that they would be starting the process of terminating parents' rights, which makes sense to me how I felt the process was a little forced in a way. And I also think that there wasn't, I don't want to say that there wasn't enough time or get my parents having a choice of whether or not they wanted to, because due to my circumstance of how I entered into care, I knew that the possibility of me returning home, especially to live with my father, was going to be slim to none. But I thought there might have been a chance of my mother still wanting me, wanting to keep me, and wanted to work on really, getting the things that she needed in order for her rights, but that unfortunately did not happen. So in my situation of having my parents terminating their rights, it was a bittersweet moment, which really just increased the feeling of loss of not having parents anymore.
Thank you for that, Antonica. Aaliyah, what about you? You're obviously, you're a lived expert, and also you've worked with many people. You've worked in the system. You've been up against these timelines. Can you share just some insights about what comes to you on this?
Yeah, I guess so. Real quick, honestly, yes. So I've been a foster care worker before, and I'm a former foster youth. So those two combined, honestly, yeah, it's been a crazy road, but what I can say is that it's allowed me like a multifaceted lens. And what I've been able to see through that is that ASFA really has the hardest impact on, the children that, realize that they're not going to go home anymore. And so the 15 to 22 months, I remember when I first started at the agency, they began to, basically explain like how the timeline works, and that you can ask for an ASFA exception if a parent, shows ongoing promise and things like that. This is my thing with the timeline. If you have somebody that's genuinely trying, and their child have not been in care for 2 years yet, I understand, the reason why ASFA was created, the ideology behind it, to provide permanency so that children wouldn't just be languishing away in foster care. And while that's still important for the children who really need that and absolutely cannot go home under any circumstances, or, they deserve permanency, but for the parents that are genuinely trying and just need additional resources and services, or just, need that time, and their children have not been in care, over 2 years, they should be allowed additional exceptions, expansions, considerations, what Jazz was talking about. So that's like my view on it, as far as, the timelines. And it's also unrealistic in terms of when you take into consideration the fact that some parents are incarcerated when their children enter care. So they're not really able to access like all of the outside resources that someone else would be, even though that's even limited sometimes. Sometimes they have parents that have severe mental health issues, and they need more time to really like get, back on track and things of that nature. Or you may have a parent that is just really struggling with different things, that they've been through. And so those timelines to say, we're going to make a permanent disconnection between you and your child, and you no longer have access to them. It's like, how can a state now, how can a country now that we know everything we know, and we know the disproportionate effects that ASFA has had on children and families, especially people of color, how can we really put a timeline on reunification, while children do deserve permanency. And like I said, I would never advocate for someone to just languish away in foster care. If you have a parent that's really trying and they genuinely do care and they're trying to work what's called a case plan, what does that timeline really look like in the future for those people that could potentially lose access to their children, forever, especially when you have younger children in the system that, they may not ever really get to see their biological parents again. The tear and the harm and the pain that must have on a family, I can't really imagine. I entered care due to abuse and neglect. I needed to be in the system. But it was just a small tinge of pain in my heart at that last court hearing where I knew that, that was it, type of thing, that I was definitely going to be in foster care until I turned 18. It was a feeling that I still to this day can't really describe. And so being in the court setting on the other end too, when a parent, pretty much finds out that it's final, that's it, it's something that you can't really describe.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaliyah. And I'm glad you mentioned this notion of languaging in care. I think ASFA has not been the solution. We still have so many young people who languish in care, whose parental rights are terminated, and now they're just legal orphans, right? And then we know the outcomes for older youth who age out of this system. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I don't think that ASFA has been the solution to that. I want to jump to Aisha. We're talking about the timelines, and Aisha, you've been in a very unique situation that others have found themselves in too, right? Being in the foster care system yourself, your parents' rights having been terminated, and then having your children removed and facing that same scenario. And thankfully, your children are back home with you. But I'd love to just get your take on these timelines and the fact that they exist in the first place.
I get a little nervous when I talk, but like my mom didn't get a lot of help, and they didn't really, back then, they didn't offer a lot of resources, and they didn't understand like a lot of mental health problems back then. So like they didn't really really look into people's lives and see what they really needed to help them. And so like I just was told, my mom didn't love me, and she's not trying hard enough, and if she loved you, then she would get you back, type thing. But having gone through it myself, it's not that black and white. I'm sorry. The timeline is just like unrealistic when it comes to the programs that you have to complete. Like I had programs that are like 26 weeks long, and if they didn't feel like it was sufficient, then I'll have to go longer, or to other programs. I had multiple programs at the same time where I had to be there 3 to 5 times a week, and that's individual therapy, and then I have parenting classes, and then I have nutrition classes, then I have family therapy, all while trying to maintain a job, and just trying to maintain housing, because I come from, I didn't have really any help or support system. So I didn't have anybody who could really help me. I was kind of starting from scratch. So it was like, all right, they had me move into a shelter for battered women in an undisclosed location. I also had to do domestic violence therapy before I could get my children back. And it just was like, they just kept feeding me lies, telling me, oh, your kids can come back and live with you here. But then told me it's not stable housing. You're going to have to find housing. And then I had to get a job, and then kind of get enough money while living in a shelter to find a place to stay was just like impossible. I just didn't make enough. And transportation, like just trying to get everywhere I needed to go on foot, by bus, or just the places. It just was, everything was just unrealistic. The timelines that you had to complete things and not making enough money to get anything done really, you know, and then just having to keep a job while having to do all of these things. Tell my job, you know, I have therapy Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then on Thursday, you know, I have family therapy or individual therapy or parenting classes or, you know, domestic violence counseling. So it was just like, how do you do all of these things that they expect of you, you know, without losing your job, you know? And they didn't want any, they didn't care. They didn't want, and still make it to all of the visits, still, you know, be everything that they want you to be. And if you weren't, you just weren't good enough. You know, they didn't want to hear any excuses, one negative mark, and, you know, you just were a bad person. So I just was feeling like, you know, I didn't have any help. I wanted to quit, and the proper help that I really needed, I wasn't getting, and I didn't know how to get it. And they didn't provide me with that, or they just, you know, send me in different directions before they really would, you know, have to offer me anything. So
Thank you, Aisha. Yeah, I know it's painful, and I appreciate you being here and sharing with us. Thank you so much. I'm hearing about just the timelines that, you know, it can't be a one size fits all, that they're unrealistic. And in addition to that, the system continues to put barrier after barrier after barrier up for you to accomplish those timelines, and it becomes impossible. So thank you all for saying all of this. Aaliyah mentioned incarcerated parents, and I wonder if there's anyone else who wants to dive in a little bit, right, on the experiences of parents who are incarcerated and face the Adoption and Safe Family Act, TPR timelines. Does anyone want to say more about that specifically? Aaliyah, do you have your hand up, or is that from last time?
I do.
Okay.
Thing I'm gonna make one quick point too, from inside the system. If a parent is involved in DCFS or, you know, in child welfare services due to something specific, let's just say they abused their child, right? Or they neglected them, or they couldn't financially provide, or whatever the case may be, and a removal occurred. The case plan is really the root of why a lot of these things happen. Why do they need to go get a substance abuse assessment? If they, now I can understand mental health, but why do they need to go get a substance abuse assessment? Why do they need to go through all these additional hoops other than parenting classes? That's what's supposed to be on there, parenting classes, something to assist them in developing their overall parental competency so that they can be, quote unquote, a better parent. I'm not even going to get into that, because being a good parent looks different for each child. So the definitions that the system has placed on what a good parent looks like is really rooted and ingrained in a long history of disparities. But what I will say is, why is that case plan so lengthy to provide all these obstacles like Aisha, you know, mentioned? In jobs these days, they don't care about that. They don't care what you have to do. A lot of our parents, especially here in Louisiana, are in rural areas, lack transportation, and even sometimes lack overall the skills to navigate all these different systems. And so then even the providers are like, oh, is this lady dumb? Like, does she know what's going on? You know, and then, like she said, the stigmas within the office of, you know, if you miss one step during visitation with your child, it's not like, oh man, well, she probably had a rough week. It more so, because you're already involved in that system, looks like you're a negative person, or like you didn't want to visit with your kid that week. And so I think that workers everywhere need to really alleviate those stigmas in their mind of what they feel like a stable and good family is supposed to look like, and really make these case plans workable and realistic according to, if we continue with these timelines, according to what's actually feasible and possible, so that people aren't, you know, years later still hurting and impacted by the pain, you know, that the system have caused them. You know, that it's disgusting to me, honestly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for following up with that, Aaliyah. Carla, what about you on the incarceration piece? Do you want to add anything?
I do. When it comes to incarceration, I also believe there's a huge stereotype in regards of the parents as well. One example I am actually going to give is that my father was actually incarcerated, but he was incarcerated wrongly due to, it was child support. However, with my dad, the way that he wasn't the type of person to where he would flaunt things or even record it. He just gave. And when it comes to one of my siblings, he was actually paying, doing everything that he could, but he didn't have receipts from the courts to actually verify that he was giving those resources to one of my siblings. And because of the fact of a lot of manipulation that happened, he went to jail because of that. And when that happened, it was very difficult when he was trying to get parental rights as far as with me and trying to get everything situated. But the judge actually looked at his file, and instead of even going through the 15 to 22 month process, she just immediately told him that he was no good. And she just immediately just wrote him off, like, yep, you're no good, keep it moving. And it was frustrating to hear that because, again, I'm thinking that he didn't love me, but I didn't know what was going on in the courts. And so the same judge who wrote him off is actually the same judge that saw my father at my graduation, even with his parental rights gone. And it's also the same one that was also trying to run for district attorney here, but saying that how she's just and correct. And so with what I'm looking at is when you do look at that process, even the stereotypes of someone who was incarcerated can play a huge role. But for me, I think what we have to do is stop telling them, okay, this is what you need to do, and start looking at transforming their lives to say, okay, what do you need to assist in regards of you, whether that is mental health, whether that is of being incarcerated. And with my father, he was actually transitioning jobs. That's why he didn't have a place. And as he was transitioning jobs, that was, of course, the worst time to ask, okay, so you need to get everything situated, without his own place. But again, ever since that situation happened, it was pretty much a downhill state from there. And for me, that's really not fair, to the point to where for a long period of time, I did not want to become a father because I felt like the system was going to take my kids anyway as a Black man, because that's how they did with my father. They were not fair with him. And so if that's the case, why should I?
We almost could have ended on your point of they need to transform the way they're doing it and instead ask, what did he need, your point about a fear of becoming a father yourself based on this experience and the termination of your parents' parental rights, I think that brings us to the point that even after you suffer the harm of TPR, which is ongoing, right? There's also all of these other, like a ripple effects of other harms and other things that happen. And I wanna talk about those. Antonica, can you sort of weigh in here too, just on some ripple effects, right? Other harms that people don't think about, but that happen over time after you experience TPR.
Yeah, so definitely one of those harms is that when you're trying to, oh my gosh. So there are a lot of harms here with this ripple effect. I know definitely one of those for me is the fears associated with parenthood. When I found out that I was pregnant, I was a senior in college at Southeastern Louisiana University. I was trying to obtain my second bachelor's degree, which was going to be in sociology at the time. It was a very stressful and difficult time of my life, not because that I was pregnant, but having my own trauma and the experience of the childhood that I had, I still had to deal with that. So it was a huge decision of mine of going into counseling, even a little bit before then, of going into counseling and really trying to address those traumas and really work on healing them, because the fear that I had was that my trauma is going to affect the way that I raised my daughter, which happened to my parents. My parents had unresolved trauma that they did not deal with. They just refused to acknowledge that. And it really affected the way that they raised me and my sisters. And so for me, that fear of am I going to make the same choices? Is this the path that I'm going to lead down? Is this what my daughter's going to experience? Am I going to become them? Which is the biggest fear that I had. So my decision of going to counsel and really working on my trauma, which I'm still doing to this day, but really working and improving that and healing from that to ensure that my children does not have experienced the same childhood that I had was very important to me. And so I believe a lot of times, especially when you're a youth in care who might have entered into care due to abuse or neglect, or, not having those parents, that support system, that lack of permanency, having a child is a completely different experience. And you might carry around that fear of that I might screw up, I might screw up like my parents did, And so it's very, very important to think about that these effects do remain, these are real experiences that youth and young adults face in care, and wanting to have that family as they get older. It might be difficult for them to even think that they want to bring a child into this world, knowing the childhood experience that they have and knowing what the system is like. They don't want to take the chances of risking that, so I think this was a beautiful thing I wanted to mention, is because I am a former foster youth, and I do have a beautiful daughter, and it is it's not necessarily a struggle as much as it was the first year, but there were definitely things that I had to overcome and separate that my parents might have did to me that I don't want to do to my child, making sure that I'm not yelling at her when I'm speaking to her. I'm not cursing at her and things like that, to really encourage that bad behavior, that negative effect that could have on her as she gets older, So those are a few things I really wanted to mention about that.
Thank you, Antonica. Aaliyah, I've heard you talk about, the disconnect from culture and community, extended family as some of the ripple effects. Do you want to say any more about that?
I guess just really quick, I'll touch on the fact that, when you enter the system, obviously, you're separated from your biological family, and depending on how many placements you go through, you have to consistently adapt to a new set of schedule, routines, culture, way of life every single time, not just the first time that you enter the system, but every single time you move. And so it can leave you wondering at some point, like, who am I? And what type of stability am I going to have? What am I really going to be like in life? And it's due to that overall disconnection from their original culture and their roots. And you're constantly left searching, for a feeling of belonging and love. But I want to make sure that other people have time to talk. So, we can turn it over to Jazz, Aisha, whoever. That's all I have.
Thanks, Aaliyah. I wanted to bring up another point, which is about the legislation, right? First of all, it's called the Adoption Safe Families Act, right? So we know where the focus is, and it provides financial incentive to get kids adopted to state agencies, rather than any financial assistance or incentive for reunification. And I'm hoping, Aisha, maybe you can talk a little bit about what that feels like and how that plays out, right, in a family's experience when that adoption is being prioritized over reunification.
Well, it was rough, both as a foster youth and as a parent watching it happen again. But it's just I wasn't adopted. My siblings were adopted. It was, my mother's rights were terminated, and I aged out. My siblings were adopted. I didn't see them from the time I was 11 till I was around like maybe 22 or something, through my own, searching and finding them. But it ripped my family apart because my siblings were adopted, and I felt like no one even wanted me. And it takes a toll on your psyche a little, what's the rush when, you can kind of keep siblings together. You can have better, programs and support systems and resources for reunification, instead of spending that money on things that's unnecessary. It seems like they will pay a lot of money for unnecessary things instead of supporting the family with that money. So it's very traumatic. I moved around a lot. I was never adopted, so I didn't even see what the rush was. You know, what was the rush? I was aged out. I didn't get any of the resources that they promised me. No car, no help with housing, schooling. I was just on my own. And I mean, I went to college for free later, because of the grants, scholarships, and stuff like that. But they ask you, were you a former foster youth? So that is how I got to go to nursing school for free after I paid half of it. But I'm off subject right now, but I just didn't see the rush and the time limits that they had. It just wasn't necessary because everybody's lifestyle is not the same. Some people can, maybe with the resources that they have and the representation that they have, can get things done a little bit quicker. But people who don't have those options, who don't have those funds, who don't have proper representation as well, things get stretched out because of that, So, if I had a lawyer I paid for, it probably wouldn't have took so long, 5 years to get my kids back. But that's another subject. I hope I kind of answered a little bit of the question. I think that they should just repeal it, just stop it. Just give people a true, honest chance and fight, and really help them with the resources that they need and the mental health resources that they need, because it's depressing, and they want you to stay undepressed. They want you. If you flip out, if you cry, then you're crazy. Or we told you, she can't handle this, and it makes you look worse when you don't even want to be alive, because it's just so painful to have to wake up every day. So it's just like the time frame as you're counting down, you're just looking at hope just get smaller and smaller. So it's not it's not motivational at all.
Yeah, Aisha, I know this is
running out. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. This is a super tough conversation, and I appreciate you taking part. Definitely take a breath, take a moment. But we're grateful that you're here and sharing. I mean, honestly, we don't talk about these harms and that pain nearly enough, and we hope that policymakers are listening, that people who can actually take action and change these experiences will listen to this and will change things. We have about 6 minutes left, and one thing that we had talked about together was sort of narratives and mindsets and things that need to change in order to change what you all and so many others have experienced. I want to just move. Maybe each of you can take a minute and share what are your thoughts for how we need to move forward, or what we can do to change what you all have experienced and with others, what others experience. We can start with Carlo.
Yes, for me, I'm actually going to go back to kind of what I was speaking on before in regards of understanding that we need to go from transactional work to transformative work. That is not of me. There's actually a wonderful man named Dr. Sean Ginwright who was speaking on that on one of his books. But when I read it, it helped me to really understand what that meant. And I will even let you all know that I'm actually about to get married soon, which is amazing. But even with me about to get married, I was almost about to get charged with fraud, because I put my biological parents where my adopted parent or my adopted grandmother should have been. And that was something that no one told me, to make sure that it has to be this way, because they explained to me that all of my parents' information is erased. And so it was already a trickle effect there. So even with the transactional work of terminating parental rights, and even with the 15 to 22 timeline, to where all I knew was that they were just trying to hurry up and rush to get things changed. And I didn't know what was going on until later on in life. But instead of having a transformative work to where they would look at the best interest for me and as well as my parents, not saying, hey, this is what you need to do, but how can we help? What resources do you need so that we can keep the family together? And I believe that would have made such a huge difference, instead of just saying that we have a timeline almost like that this is a drive-through going through McDonald's. I'm giving you this money, you're going to give me this product. Instead, we need to really have a conversation, because transformative work isn't something simple. Transformative work is a progression. It actually takes time, and there's no time limit to transformative work.
Thank you, Carlo. Jazz, you want to follow that up?
Yes, I definitely second all that Carlos said, and I won't repeat what he shared. But definitely the restoration of families is the main shift, and I would say should be the focus of advocates. Restoring unity of the family, restoring the power and the strength that we have. Families, specifically Black families in our America. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jazz. What about you, Aaliyah? Some parting words.
Real quick, I guess I'll say that I think that the child welfare system, the way it was originally developed, was rooted in white supremacy, what those prominent families at the time looked like. And so most of the standards, such as traditional housing, all of these other things that basically is what dominant culture feels like safety and well-being and love looks like. That's a lot of times what the system strives. And I've even seen, unfortunately, African-American workers within the system strive towards those same end goals, because the system have conditioned them to believe what safety is supposed to look like. And so I agree with, Aisha, that the stigmas that really exist is, they want you to look and feel a certain way. And if you don't do that, they pretty much, start stacking cards against you of why you're not supposed to be a parent to the child that you actually birthed, and that you carried for 9 months. They start coming up with all these different reasonings. And so I think all agencies, that I've seen, their mission states that they're supposed to strive towards overall permanency, safety, and well-being for children and families that they serve. So if anything that you have in your mind that's biased or stigmatized or whatever, if it doesn't align with that, then why are you doing it? Period. That's just it.
Thanks, Aaliyah. And Tonica and Aisha, we got 1 minute. Final words?
I just want to say thank you, and congratulations on this platform. I'm really appreciative of having a voice and having people really care enough to try to make a change. So just say thanks.
Thanks, Aisha. And Tonica?
Really, just really quick, I'm just gonna say it. Where is the support for youth? Youth just like Aisha, who shared her struggle of having the transition out of care with nothing. There's plenty of youth who have a very similar story to Aisha. So what can be done about that? How can we better support them?
Thank you, Antonica. And I just want to thank all of you so much for your time today. And thank you to our partners in this campaign, #Repeal ASFA, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, Family Integrity and Justice Works at Public Knowledge, the Family Justice Group, United Family Advocates, and the National Association of Counsel for Children. We're really grateful for all of you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you who joined us today.